Hey, welcome back to the podcast. I have a special guest on the show today. We're going to be talking about something that I actually want to learn more about. And I know a lot of you will want to learn more about. I got Paul Neal on the show today with Vantage Point Commercial Capital. Paul, welcome to the show.
Yeah. Hey, Brad, thanks for having me. I'm excited about it, man.
Absolutely. And you also have a book that you wrote,
hmm
and I want to mention that right now. Tell us a little bit about yourself and the book that you wrote and kind of why you wrote that book.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, the book is called Unleash Your Business, Unlock Wealth, Autonomy, and Control by Buying Your Building and Firing Your Landlord. Um, I'm into firing landlords. So I, back around 30,000 foot view, I got into real estate finance in the late 90s and have been in that business and have had a couple of businesses, but that's really been my passion. And started on the residential side, but sort of migrated over into commercial because most of my clients ended up being business owners and entrepreneurs. And I started to notice trend that a lot of them had businesses that were generating a lot of cash. They were doing well, but most of them didn't have any ownership, and a lot of them were coming to me and asking to buy and invest in like investment real estate, like single family homes and some small multifamily and all that, which we did and we still do, but I started to notice that most of them were still renting the space that their business was operating in, and I'm like, hey, this is crazy because there's some of the same benefits that you can get with other investment real estate you can get for your own building, and much more. Actually, there's a lot more opportunity, and so I started to really shift my focus there a number of years ago, and it's just been a passion because now we've seen so many awesome outcomes from that and things that people have been able to do. I'm sure we'll get into some of that, as we talk. But that's why I wrote the book. It basically outlines the opportunity, the missed opportunity for a lot of people, and sort of the process and what's involved. Because there's a lot to it, and so it's really an education piece to to help entrepreneurs and business owners understand what's involved in the process. Because there's really nowhere to go for it, other than the local bank, and they don't really tell you anything. They just tell you, what they want, that sort of thing. So that's why.
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously tons of information on residential investing, right? But
Yeah.
buying commercial, you start talking about like cap rates and all these different, terms. And you're like, what does that even mean? And so it can definitely be a little overwhelming.
hmm
And then you said something interesting there, Paul, which is a lot of guys are doing well and they're they're looking for investments, which is
hmm
smart, but then they're literally throwing money out the back door by leasing the space that they're in.
Yeah. 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 They're walking on a potential gold mine. It's like there was this book I read many years ago called Acres of Diamonds by Russell somebody or another. But anyway, it's a short little book, and Russell Conrad, I think. Anyway, it just talks about, that we're walking on acres of diamonds in our own backyard. Everyone's looking, the grass is greener over there. It's always greener across the way. But, we neglect what's right under our feet. And so this idea, so for instance, this idea of, you're in your building and you're leasing the space and you're paying, thousands of dollars every month to someone else, and it's a trade-off, right? They're allowing you to use the space, and so you need a space. It's good. You got to run your business, but you can have a lot more. And so um, I had these guys coming to me, Brad, that want to buy investment real estate, and typically on investment real estate, you're looking at 20 or 25% down. Um, and the crazy thing about it is if you buy the building that your business operates out of, or a building, or build a building that your business operates out of, then we can do that for a lot less money down. Believe it or not, 0 to 10% in many cases. And so it's like, wow, you're leveraging all this money for some other tenant, and now you're going to be a landlord for somebody, but you could be your own landlord of your own business and do it for less. So yeah.
So, okay, we don't have to go knee deep in the weeds on this, but what's the vehicle by how you can do it for less?
Well, so there is a whole. You mentioned residential real estate in a minute ago, and so there's a lot of parallels there, but a lot of differences. So most everybody, you understand, and your listeners understand the residential world. You know that you go buy a house, you're going to go to a bank or a mortgage company or something, and everybody pretty much plays by the same set of rules, right? Because those rules are defined by what they call these government sponsored entities, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, Ginnie Mae. they write the rules because they end up securitizing all the loans that are done by these banks and mortgage companies. And so you might get a little, difference in your interest rate or term based on where you go, but it's going to be marginal for the most part. The commercial world is completely different. The commercial world, commercial loans aren't regulated by any body, or they're not purchased and securitized by any one group like Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac. So you have local banks that do loans. You have national banks that do loans. You have SBA backed loans, which can be a really good loan. It's struck based on how it's structured. You have independent private investors that will fund loans. You have insurance companies that will fund commercial loans. So it's I won't say it's the Wild West, but there's a lot more variation and opportunity because it's not one entity defining all of the rules, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes a lot more sense. So my background, when most people, at least in the contractor space, start out of their house, right? Like
Hmm.
they're going to start their business, they just work out of their house because they don't really need anything yet. But then as they start to grow, they add another vehicle, they add some equipment, they add some tools, they need a place to park it, and then at some point they got to move out, right?
Hmm.
They have to get somewhere, and I would say probably 95% of the time they're going to go rent, whether it's a
Sure.
storage warehouse space where they just keep the stuff, or they rent something that has an office and now they move their office in there. And so I did this game, started out with little tiny like 8x10 storage unit, and then
Yeah.
upgraded to like a 10x20 storage unit, and just kept upgrading storage units, and in my construction business. And I had a sweet deal. Like the price of the rent was very cheap, but I had a 2,500 square foot warehouse for like 650 a month, right?
Right.
Very inexpensive. And that's where I ended up like the last 4 or 5 years in my business. And then now I just moved into a commercial office building, just rented
Okay.
out an office space because I don't have my construction business anymore. So I don't need all of that storage space. But this idea like of how much money I've thrown away, if you want to call it that,
Hmm.
over the last however long I've been started renting, so probably about 12, I'd say 12 years,
Yeah.
right? That would be a substantial amount of money of equity
Hmm.
into a building that I could
Right.
have purchased. But the
Right.
challenge I see here is 12 years ago, I didn't have the financial capital to be able to get into that building. So like
Right.
what's the natural progression to be able to get to the point to where you can get your own building?
Yeah, no, that's great, and I see that a lot, and that's very common for the successful contractors and service-based businesses. They start at home and they sort of graduate themselves out as they get more and more success, and so that's sort of bootstrapping your way up, which is how most businesses do it. Quite frankly, most aren't going to Wall Street getting a loan, a venture capital or whatever. So what I tell people is really, when you get to the point where you've got 3, 4, 5 years of business under your belt, you got consistent cash flow coming in, and you've got sort of a vision of where you're going, and it's sustainable, right? Because in the beginning, when you're working from home and then you're maybe busting out to that first small space, that might be appropriate to lease at that point because you're still kind of getting your sea legs, right? You're building your customer base, you're starting to build repeat customers, you get some employees and all that. But once you've got that and you've got a team, you might maybe have 3, 4, 5 employees, something like that. Maybe you're doing, I don't know. I've seen different revenue numbers, but on the low end, maybe a half a million a year in revenue, and maybe you're growing from there. And you have some resources, and now's the time where you should really start considering this opportunity to buy a building, because think about the parallel of buying your family home, right? So when you first start out, most people, they like when my wife and I got married, we rented for a while because A, we didn't know we were going to be in the area. B, we didn't have a lot of financial resources. We didn't inherit a lot of money. So, we have to kind of find our way. But as our business started to become successful, then we made enough money that we want to buy a house. And the reason we want to buy a house, even though it wasn't our dream house, was because we could start taking part of that mortgage payment, to your point, paying some equity, paying down the mortgage, getting some tax advantages. And then as the market, over time, the value of that house would grow, then that equity position would grow. then we could use that to when we outgrew the first house and we had a family, like we need more space. We had to struggle a little bit in the beginning because, we had to come up with down payment and all that. But now we've got this equity in this house that when we sold the house, we use that for the down payment on the next house, right? And have done that a couple of times. And so buying a building is not that much different with a business. As a business are going to evolve over time, and they're going to get hopefully larger and larger over time, right? Is the goal, or at least to a certain point. And then maybe you want to just run the business and or maybe sell the business, or maybe start a second business or whatnot. Because a lot of businesses, and I see a lot in your space too, where successful contractors will spin up secondary related businesses, right? So like I've got one right now, very similar track record to yours. He does high end remodels. He's down at the beach, and he's been in business about, I think, 8 years, something like that. Well, all of his business is repeat and referral now. And he'd been renting a space for the last few years, and we got to talking. And so, long story short, he's building a warehouse space now, 12,000 square feet, and he's going to occupy about 7 or 8,000 feet of that, and he's going to rent out the other space. And oh, by the way, he's also in the last year spun up a related HVAC company, because all of his customers that want remodels, they all have HVAC issues from time to time. And so they're always asking him for referrals. So he's like, well, I'll just get a company and I'll hire a guy and all that. And so he's going to bring that into his building. So now he's got this building that he's got room for his current business and this new little fledgling startup. And he's going to rent out part of it. And that rent is going to help defer almost the entire mortgage payment, believe it or not. So, so in his case, he paid rent for a while, positioned himself where now I've got a solid business that's growing. I have sort of a vision of where I want to go. And I'm going to in this case, build a building a little bit larger than he needed, which is a strategy, right? And so then he could rent out part of it. And then assuming his business continues to grow, his plan is that he won't kick out. That's really a bad term, but one of his tenants, he'll ask them not to renew the lease at some point. So then he can expand into that space, and he can continue to expand in the building that he owns. But in the meantime, they're paying the freight on the building. So he's not wasting his rent dollars. He's building equity, and he's positioning himself for future growth in the building itself. So there's just some reasons, but again, it wasn't day one out of his house. It was after a few years of stability and some growth and consistent customer base. And you sort of have a sense when you're like that, right? Where your business is like, it's going to come in, and you've got enough customers in your base that keep coming and refer you, like, okay, I feel good about this, and it's growing, and now I have some future.
That is the exact strategy that I was on trajectory to do with my construction business. Literally buy a building. I think I was thinking like a 8,000 square foot, and then occupying about half of that, putting in tenants, like that exact strategy. Before I decided to get into the business coaching side of it. But so in that scenario, just as an example for people listening, like how much capital, or how much percentage would you have to be able to bring to a job, not a job, but a deal like that? Like if you're going to build your own building with tenants, like what would you have to bring to that deal?
It's typically 10%.
Okay.
So 10% of the project cost. So like in his scenario, it's about $1 million building. And so he's bringing about 100,000 to the deal. If you get into really special use buildings, it could be a little bit more. Like I have one that's building an indoor pool facility, because they're a pool training company. So that's kind of a unique business, right? I mean, it's like an office, warehouse, flex space, can be used in a lot of different ways, a lot of different businesses, but an indoor pool, not so much. So in that case, it'll be more like 15%. But that's generally the exposure. And the way we prefer you not put so much into the building. We want some, but what's more interesting to us is after the transaction that you have sufficient liquidity and working capital so that you can continue your operations and you're not stressed. If you take all your money, that's on the sideline, and put it into the bricks and mortar, and you don't have operating capital, or you're stressing that, then that's not a good position for you to be in. And so we'd rather have a little lower down payment, and then, and then have money on the sideline in that scenario.
Yeah, you wouldn't want to have 100,000 in the bank and then go drop 100 grand on a down payment and then have zero, working capital to
Right.
survive on. That makes total sense there.
Yeah, I had a client, great friend Nathan, who had a small trucking business, and he down at the port, his short haul, the ships would come in, and he would take the goods from the ships and store it temporarily in warehouses that he would rent, and then he would then move it to long haul shippers. Anyway, he had an opportunity to buy a warehouse that came available down near the port, and he thought, hey, my customers are already paying big bucks for the short term storage. I can just, if I do it for them, I'll just get in that revenue stream. I'm already doing the work. And so he went to his local banking relationship, and they wanted 20 or 25% down. And he had the money, but again, it would have taxed him. And he's trying to grow a business, and growing businesses take a lot of cash, right? Because you got to advertise and hire people and get equipment and buy new trucks and things like that, right? So we were able to do it for 10% down. It made all the difference because he was able to get in the building, and now he's got the money on the sideline, so he's got plenty of operating capital, not a lot of stress, and then now he's got the revenue stream coming in as a result. So, so there are different ways to skin the cat, and the misconception that a lot of people have is because when they start thinking about this idea, a lot of times they'll just go to the local bank that they've been dealing with their deposits. Because to your point, I started with this local bank, when I was in my house, and I've got my customers, all my accounts are set up there, right? And it's too difficult to want to move my bank accounts, and so I'm gonna go talk to those guys, and then they'll say, yeah, well, typically you want 20% down if they do it at all. Banks are notorious for saying no, just because they really don't want to loan you the money. They want your deposits is really what they want, but they don't really want to loan you the money. They'll loan it to you for cars and credit cards and short-term boats and things like that, where the terms are shorter. They're not as interested in doing real estate long-term because it ties their money up for a lot longer, right? So they will do it. Don't get me wrong, but they're going to give you one option. And as a contractor, right? Look, if you have one tool, you got one saw in your toolbox, you're going to use that saw every single time, right? No matter if the project or the job needs it or not.
Yeah. Is there one thing I was gonna say a while ago is, like, for obviously the listeners are contractors or service-based companies. Most of these guys can have the ability to GC their own build out, which is gonna also save them some money on that part of it as well.
Yeah, that's a bit tricky. So if they're buying consistent, existing building, and they want to do some build out inside, that's not such a big deal. That's easy. If they want to buy or they want to build a brand new building from scratch and they want to be the GC, that's a little trickier because lenders want sort of a third party. What I've seen a lot of contractors do is they have contractor relationships with other contractors, and so they'll work with somebody that they trust that is the GC of record, and they'll handle the GC aspects, and they can sub out a lot of the work to the contractor, legally and ethically, and there's no problem with that. But they always want, all the lenders are going to want a third party kind of in there to make sure,
Yeah,
it's doable, Brad, but it's really, really, it's not worth the pain and suffering.
Well, I guess it depends. I mean, if it's going to save me 100 grand, that's probably worth the pain and suffering.
Well, it might be. And again, like I said, a lot of times you can work out a collegial relationship with another GC, that makes it even easier.
Yeah. I'm not pretend like I didn't say this, but this happens all the time where a contractor wants to work in another town that doesn't have a license.
Yeah.
There's a contractor on record of pulling the permits and stuff. So.
Yeah. I mean, there's obviously the difference between, reality and how people operate. And, we try to do everything, ethically, morally, legally. You're going to do that. And that does bring up a point, though, that one of the things that I always like to stress is in this process, it's really critical that, if you're going to go into buying a building, that that we talk about the dirt up front, like any potential issues and things like that, any skeletons in the closet or whatever, because it will come out in the process. You can't hide anything today anymore, particularly when it comes to lending. I mean, they've got databases on this, that, and everything. They're connected to, who knows what. So most of the time, it's not an issue. We can deal with things. We just need to know up front so we have a plan to mitigate. And if we know early, banks and lenders and investors are generally okay with that. You're like, hey, I had this issue. Here's what happened, and like, okay, cool, no big deal. But but if you go to your local bank and you don't tell them any of that, and you go in the process, and then they find out 3 weeks into the process, then it's not good, because it's kind of once burned, twice shy is how they operate. So first impressions are important, and we try to help people, hey, uncover things. So we have like a 53 question questionnaire we've come up with. It sounds like a lot. It doesn't take that long to answer, but it helps uncover things that you wouldn't think about that will come up in the process. So that way there's no secrets or mysteries that are going to, landmines that are going to blow up downstream.
Yeah, absolutely. So what else does somebody need to understand or know about if they're going to buy a commercial building or build one, whatever, like what are some like main points that they need to be aware of?
Yeah, main points, a couple things. Expectations. Process is going to take longer than a residential loan. So if you go buy a house, generally you can go into contract and close in 30 days, sometimes faster. When you're looking at commercial space, there's more due diligence involved. Generally, it's a 60 to 90-day process. I tell people that if you're thinking about buying a building, that you should really start considering the process 6 to 12 months out, so you can start getting your ducks in order. We like to do that for them. And just because there's more involved. So when you actually go into contract on a commercial building, you're going to have what they call a due diligence period. So generally the due diligence period is going to be 30 to 60 days. And that's where you have the opportunity to make sure you're going to be approved for funding, to make sure that there's no environmental issues with the property, which is another thing that we have to discover, like particularly if you buy a property that may have had like gasoline tanks on it at one point. Okay. So we're going to do an environmental. If it's an office building, it's a pretty simple, fast, and easy thing. If it's again like an old gas station, it's a little bit more involved. But you don't want to get hamstrung with somebody else's liability. So it's to protect you, really, at the end of the day. The appraisal, there's always a commercial appraisal. Those are more involved than a residential appraisal. Residential appraisal is typically, 20 pages long. Commercial is going to be probably about 150 pages long, where it goes into market demographics and a lot of detail. So that takes longer in the process. And the thing I really suggest is a lot of guys will talk to their residential real estate agent about helping them find commercial space, and it's just a bad decision for a number of reasons. One, commercial real estate agents, it's a smaller universe in a town. Where you might have thousands of residential realtors, you might have 100 or maybe a couple of hundred commercial real estate agents. And the commercial agents know each other because they do transactions with each other all the time. A lot of properties there's no Zillow for commercial real estate. I mean, there's LoopNet and there's a few sources where you can find properties for sale, but a lot of it's off market stuff. And a lot of it is like these commercial realtors know that, hey, this building over here in 6 months, the lease expires, and we know that they're looking to go do something. And you're not going to find that in any public database, but they know. And so you want to partner with one that's knowledgeable, knows the local community, and is dialed in, because they can help A, find you deals, and B, really understand, what your needs are. They'll help you with your needs and what you're trying to do. The other reason why residential guys and gals aren't the best choice is a lot of times their expectations are not correct. Again, they want to close in 30 days. And so they write these contracts that are residentially related. I see them, I get them like all the time. And I'm like, there's a closing date, 30 days, but commercials 60 to 90 days long is just the way the process goes. 60 days if your financials are in order and we have what we need up front. 90 days if we have to pluck things out of people, and like, I need this, and I need this, and I need that, or if you get into holidays, they throw commercial works at a different pace as well. They talk about banker's hours. That's kind of a true statement.
Yeah.
So expectations are important. And again, back to that short time frame, this due diligence period, a lot of times on a commercial building, you're going to put an earnest money deposit down. And like in residential, that earnest money deposit is going to be refundable to you if you don't close in most cases. But in commercial, if you pass your due diligence period and you haven't opted out of the contract, your earnest money turns hard. And so you'll lose that money if you don't close on the deal. So there's some differences there um, that you should be aware of: expectations, timeline, preparation, but again, it's easy to mitigate all that. You just have to know what you're getting into, and don't jump right in and say, I just got notice my lease is coming due in a month. Now I need to go buy a building. I'm like, not a good choice, right?
Yeah.
Get a 6 months extension, and now let's talk about it.
Yeah.
Let's dig in and do what's going to be right for you, because it's a long-term commitment, right? I mean, that's the other thing. This is not a short-term commitment; it's long-term commitment. But there's tremendous benefits to it. But you just got to know what you're getting into.
Yeah, and you said something there too, like, if you're looking for a place to buy, I mean, obviously if it's a gas station and you're trying to convert it, there was gas tanks there, you got to deal with all that stuff, right? But what maybe people may be unaware of is they're buying, let's say, an empty warehouse building, and there was nothing in there. The people before that, they had a shipping business, but 5 businesses before that, they had chemicals in there that you weren't
Right.
aware of.
Yeah.
And now you're dealing with, EPA requirements for all that stuff.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
So you inherit the entire history of that building whenever you go into stuff like that. And if you're not, like you said, doing that due diligence, and if you're like, well, I don't want to pay for testing, chemical testing or whatever, because it's going to cost hundreds of dollars, it's going to save me money.
Yeah.
You could really be biting yourself or shooting yourself in the foot right there. Hey, just a quick timeout from the show. In the next 30 seconds, I'm going to tell you exactly how you can transform your contracting business. Imagine being part of a community of winners where you can find out exactly what they've done to be successful. That's exactly what you get when you join the Profit Club. But it's not just a community. You get lifetime access to all of my course-related material, including all future material that I add. But wait, there's more. Each week, you'll get access to 3 group coaching calls to talk about sales, marketing, and business problems and answer any questions that you may have. Still not convinced? How about personalized one-on-one coaching to help you overcome your limits? And here's my promise to you. I guarantee you will double your investment within 90 days, or I personally will work with you one-on-one until you do. So don't wait. Elevate your game with the Profit Club today. Now let's get back to the show.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of treatment, and that is right, because you don't have that in residential, right? I mean, it just doesn't exist. But in commercial, you hit the nail on the head. It's about protecting everybody, right? Because we want to protect you, because we want you to be successful, because you've got to pay the loan off. We're going to loan money. We want to make a return on our investment, right? And I think Will Rogers said, I'm more concerned about the return of my investment than the return on my investment. And so we want to make sure, first of all, we get the money back. And if there's an EPA claim out there, who knows what's going to happen.
Yeah, and like you said, if you get 10 people, the history of 10 people in this transaction, 9 of them can be honest, but it only takes 1 who's dishonest.
That's right.
That's going to get you.
That's
So,
right. That's right.
I wanted to touch on what you said about finding a commercial realtor. So when I found this office that I'm in now, a friend of mine who he is a commercial broker. And so I reached out to him and I was like, hey man, I'm looking for an office space, and he asked the requirements and all that stuff. And we looked at one other place that wasn't going to work out until we ended up here. But what I did not realize was, like, they will actually negotiate on your behalf for, everything that's going on. Unlike yes, residential, they'll kind of negotiate for you. But I mean, he was like reading my contract and was saying like, hey, we don't like this language in here. We don't need this. They're saying you got to have a 6-month renewal term. And like, that's ridiculous. Like, he was just going to bat for me.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's because he was a buddy of mine or that's just what he normally does. But having that, I realized, like, oh, wow, like, I'm glad that he was one that was negotiating this for me because I would have missed a lot of the stuff.
You're absolutely right, Brad. No, that's the typically good commercial realtor is going to do that with every client, because he's like you and your coaching clients, right? It's one thing to have a customer or a client. It's another thing to have a customer or client for life that comes back again and again and refers you to other people. And you want to serve. And most people don't buy or lease commercial space on a regular basis, maybe once or twice in their life, right? I mean, if you're even a business owner. So same thing when it comes to buying. And that's why you need I believe you need an advocate. And that's why I wrote the book. If you're going to buy, because the same kind of concept applies. You have a commercial realtor who's going to help negotiate the terms of the contract, but you need a third party also to help you understand the loan terms that are out there. So we work with about 100 plus different banks and investors nationally, and they're all different based on your situation. Some of them are going to want your spouse to guarantee the loan. Some of them are going to want to put your home to put a lien on your primary home. Some of them are going to want what they call covenants, and so it's a lot of gobbledygook, right? To someone who doesn't know. But what it says is that we want your financials every year, and we're going to look at. I mean, if your business starts not doing so well, then now you're violating the loan covenant. So technically, we could call this loan. Or if you make late payments on a credit card, now you're in default on our loan, even though you've made loan payments on time. So you got to know what you're getting into, and you can avoid those if you do, or somebody's looking out for that. I already talked about putting deposits. I think in your local bank, that's what they want. They might do a loan for you, but they're going to require deposits. And really, do you want to put all your eggs in one basket? I mean, if you get into trouble, do you want the people that have your loan to also have all your cash? I don't
Right.
know, maybe. So and you need someone who could educate you on the options and then also advocate for you, because there's on any potential issues that are there. It's like, how do we mitigate this? Well, they had this issue this year. The cash flow wasn't this good last year, but this year it is. How do we mitigate or see beyond that to make this work, kind of thing.
Right. And I'm sure you would tell everybody that they should hire their cousin that just got their license last week to be their broker, right?
Yeah, right. Exactly. My cousin Vinny, he's great.
Yeah.
The two Utes will they want to buy this building.
Obviously, a little sarcasm there. It's like my buddy who's been a broker for many, many, many years. Like you want somebody who knows what they're doing because they're going
Yeah.
to know the ins and outs of all of it. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
Yeah, you
okay,
do.
so
And I think anyone that you can get a sense that, again, if someone's trying to put you into a product or put you into a certain space or whatever, you got to kind of question their motives. You want someone, no matter who you're working with on the real estate side, the lending side, or whatever, that's gonna find out what your needs are, what your concerns are, what your goals are, and then try to present options for you to make intelligent choices to say, well, if you go this route, here's the pros and cons here. If you go this route, here's the pros and cons here. You could also go this route, but understand what you're getting into before you commit. And it's not my responsibility to make the decision for you, but it's my responsibility. It's the real estate agent's responsibility to give you options based upon what I know about you and your business and what you're trying to do. But then and then answer questions and have some dialogue. But ultimately, it's up to you to make the choice. But eyes wide open, right? You know what you're going into.
yeah, absolutely. You want people on your team, like you said,
Exactly.
not selling for their benefit, but helping you sell or buy for your benefit. So,
Yeah, exactly.
um, the question I wanted to ask, like, taking it, if you take out like good deals, like where you
Mhm.
find a fixer upper building or whatever, if you're just for the sake of the argument, like if you're paying full retail for a building, asking price, full price versus buying a building, or I'm sorry, building a building,
Mhm.
which one would you recommend be the better option?
Well, kind of the question, the general answer we give is it depends, but building is going to be more expensive today. Unless you can mitigate some of the costs because you are a general contractor and you can work that deal out, okay, and you get some discounts there. So in that scenario, building could be the better route. Also, if you build, you can build specifically to suit to your processes, your customer experience, your employee experience, things that I have a friend, Steve, who's a commercial contractor. He builds commercial buildings, and he has a cabinet company as well. He's like part owner. He was able to buy out the other owner after a few years. Anyway, they owned the building, and he went in once the other guy who was running the business, he bought him out. Steve brought in a manager who was more used to like modern processes and things, and they renovated the inside of the building completely, retooled it, put in one machine, some kind of CNC machine, to build these cabinets. And he was literally able to almost double his output with the same crew in the same building because he built it out exactly the way he wanted to. So basically, the only thing that remained the same was the shell of the building, and they went in and
Right.
just basically gutted the interior. So it's a case by case basis. When you're financing a new construction, there are some contingencies you have to finance for. So that could add to the expense. Like we generally add an extra 10% to what we think the cost is going to be into the loan. Also, generally, you're not making interest payments on the loan while you're building the building. So that 8 or 9 month period, um, someone has to pay interest. So what happens is we'll basically create an interest reserve in the loan. So that's basically added to the loan. So you've got some additional potential expenses there when you're building versus when you just buy something that's already freestanding. Um, but they both can work based on your situation. You could still get the same benefits from both of the equity appreciation, the tax advantages, and the control.
Would you recommend though, based on what you just said, and I've heard this happens a lot in residential when people are going to build a house. Would it be smarter to buy first and realize that that's possibly not going to be your last building
Yeah.
because you don't know yet? Using the example of your buddy who retooled the whole building,
Hmm.
like you don't know yet what's going to be efficient. And would that be a viable option then?
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, so let's say you get a starter building. Let's say maybe you talk about your 2,500 square foot warehouse space. You buy that. Maybe you've got 800 feet in the front is your office, and the rest is for your vans and equipment and that sort of thing. And you're there over the course of 3, 4, 5 years. And about 3 years into it, you're like, man, this thing is really growing. I've got more staff. I got more vans. I'm having now to park them outside, and um, in fact, the guy building the building, one of the things is that's one of his motivations. He kept getting, when people were stealing catalytic converters, they would cut the catalytic converters off his trucks, and just a mess. But and even in a nice area. So you're like, okay, now I have some equity in this building. You bought it for X number, and now 3, 4 years later, it's worth a lot more. Not to mention you paid some of the equity, paid some of the mortgage balance down. So you have a couple of options now. So now you're like, okay, I want to build. I know what I want. I've got enough cash flow that I can build extra space, so I can rent part of that out and maybe grow into it. Or I don't want the hassle. I just want to buy something that's built. But now you've got time, and so you can either then sell that space and take the equity and plug it into the new building, or you could keep that building and now you can lease that out to a tenant. And so now you're a commercial landlord yourself, and so that's cash flowing. Let them continue to pay that off. Um, and you're getting the tax advantages and all that and the appreciation on the building. Let somebody else pay the freight. So it's not that much different from residential. And again, it's where residential people will house hack that when they come into building their investment portfolio, where particularly the young and the single people will do it. They'll go buy a house or maybe a duplex with very little minimum down, because you don't have to have a lot down when you're buying residential, and they'll stay in it for a year or two, and then they'll do the same thing to another house. They'll move to another primary residence where they're an owner occupant. They move in it, but they
Right.
keep the other house as a rental. And they keep doing this, for a number of years. And so they have 4, 5, 6 homes that they've accumulated. Same thing you could do in commercial, because commercial owner occupied real estate, which basically means your business is going to occupy that space. or 50% of the space if it's existing. If you're building it new, it has to be 60%. But as long as you're the owner occupant, you can get in that space for 0 to 10% down. Okay. Typically 10 is a good number to go by, but in many cases less based upon cash flow and that sort of thing. So you could do that for a few years, then move to another one and move to another one. Or if your business is expanding and you want to open a whole nother business in a different town or a different part of town, you could keep that building and you're still operating your business there. And then you go buy another building across town and your business is going to operate there as well. That's also owner occupied. As a business, you can have more than one owner occupied building as you expand over time. Whereas if you're a residential client, you can only have one owner occupied house because you're going to live in it. Right.
Right.
So, but your business, like I have a dentist who did this. He came out of dental school. His idea was he didn't really want to clean teeth. He really wanted to build a dental practice that he could expand over time and create cash flow and then maybe sell it. So he came out with this design to buy a building. Now he couldn't afford it in the first couple of years, but once he got things rolling, he bought that building. Well, then as his practice grew, he said, I'm going to buy one on the other side of town. And so he bought a building on the other side of town, hired a dentist to come in there out of school who didn't have his own practice. Right. And so 10 years later, he's got 4 or 5 buildings now, and they're all owner occupied business because it's all his dental practice, even though he's not the dentist in there practicing. Right. And so now he's got a dental practice that's cash flowing out the wazoo, but he's also got a real estate business that's worth, a ton of money and just getting worth more and more every day. And it's deferring some of the taxes that he's would have to pay as the dentist, because, as a successful business owner, you start making some money, you start losing tax deductions. So by owning the space, you can get some tax deductions that you don't qualify for, because generally you'll have a real estate company that buys the building, and then your business is the operating company, and your business will lease the building from your operating company. So you're both the tenant and the landlord. It's kind of funny, but anyway.
Also mitigates liability by doing that as well.
Yeah, exactly. So so to your point, long-winded answer. I think I got off a little bit on a snowy road, but
No, it's all good.
But the idea was, you can start small and you can scale over time as your business scales and grows, and again, as you start secondary businesses and tertiary businesses, that sort of thing.
When you were talking about the dentist, the thought that came to mind was the movie The Founder, about the McDonald's. Have you seen that movie? I think Michael Keaton was the actor in it.
I have not, but you talk about McDonald's restaurants, that story?
Yeah. It's about the story of McDonald's. And there was one scene where a guy comes in. He's like, you're not in the hamburger business. You're in the real estate business. And he was talking about how you should be buying this property and then leasing it to the franchisees and all. That's what came to mind. That scene in that movie came to mind when you were talking about your dentist person there.
That's actually in my book. I put a story in there about Ray Kroc and McDonald's. And
okay.
I have a couple of friends, clients that did that with car washes. And so their idea was 14 years ago to get in the car wash business, but it was really because they wanted to buy high valued real estate, and they wanted something to pay for it as the property appreciated in value over time. And so they started with a small kind of rinky-dink car wash, and then they leveraged that through what's called 1031 exchanges. They would take the equity and appreciation and roll it to larger ones. And over the course of 14 years, it was all about really the operating company just basically paying them a salary, but covering the expenses. And, but the real payout was in the equity appreciation of the property underneath the building. And they sold last year for a very, very healthy sum, a nice 8-figure sum. And so, what a payout. And, oh, by the way, they deferred a lot of taxes, because every time they sold a property, they did a 1031 tax exchange and rolled it in. And so they didn't have to pay any tax on that throughout the whole process. So there's things you can do. I was talking to somebody the other day. It wasn't my client, but she was a chiropractor, and she said she had a client that had a successful business and had bought their building, and they used the equity in their building to buy a competitor's business. So there's a lot of things you can do with it's almost like, Brad, you create this forced savings account. I think we said at the beginning is a lot of higher income, like professionals or business owners, you have high income, but you have a tendency to spend it, right? I mean, a little large, nicer house,
A
you get
little nicer
a little
boat.
nicer boat, right? A couple of ATVs, motorcycles, all that. Pretty soon, you're living up to your income and you're still paying rent. But at least if you're living up to your income and you're paying a mortgage on a building that you own, at some point you're going to own this asset free and clear, which makes your business more valuable when you go to sell. If you want to sell a construction business or whatever, if you don't have any assets, it's just you, then you're just selling sort of a customer base and a lot of blue sky, right?
Right.
But if you got a business with systems and customers, and oh, by the way, this building that goes with it, it's worth a lot more. And you can open the door to many more potential buyers because it's easier to finance a business with real estate than just a business per se. And so more people can qualify to buy that business from you. So therefore, you get a higher price.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. It's kind of like investing against your bad natures that bad nature desires that you might have.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, it's totally true. It's like, you look back after, it's amazing. You look back, time passes, right? Like 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. And you're like, tag on it, man. That time, where'd it go? But you're like, oh, look, at least I have some equity in my house.
Right.
I've been making this payment and it's worth how much did my neighbor just sell the house for, And so you're like, wow, it's pretty cool. But time passes either way.
Absolutely. I know we're getting short on time here. The book I have not read it yet. I'll definitely take a look at that. So with your business, what exactly do you do to help people with the commercial side of buying or whatever?
Yeah. It's a great question. So we have a process. We start with an ownership strategy session where we just basically have a 15, 20-minute conversation and we cover some of the key points of what it takes, what it would take to qualify to buy, a property. And at that point, if it looks like that somebody's legitimate and like, yeah, they're we think they can do it based on what they've told us and those key considerations. Um, then we enter into a formal relationship. We call it our signature buyer readiness program, where it's basically a 3 to 6 month program where we pre-underwrite um, your situation. As I said earlier, we start with like a 53 question questionnaire to uncover your goals, your current situation, your future dreams, any issues that might be out there. We deep dive on financials. So a lot of times we'll partner up with your accountant or CPA and get all the financial documents to kind of save you all that hassle, kind of in a concierge kind of role. Once we get all that information and understand what you're trying to do, then we do an analysis and say, okay, Brad, here's how much building you can afford. Here's why. Here's some different loan programs. Here's the pros and cons of each. What resonates with you? And we have a dialogue. And then once at that point, if you feel like you're ready to move forward, then we can either partner you with a commercial agent or help you work with a commercial real estate agent, where we're now a team to say, okay, this agent and us from a financing standpoint, and you from the buyer, the borrower, are all on the same sheet of music. So everyone knows what you're negotiating for. Everyone knows the opportunity. So basically, ultimately what we bring to the table is knowledge, education, and a stress-free experience, because we handle the stuff up front. So you're not telling your team, hey, I'm going to go buy a building, and then you find out, well, maybe you're not because there was something you didn't know about, or it's, we're going to handle that all up front without being a distraction to what you're doing in your day-to-day business, so you can continue to work in or on your business, and then we can be there as your guide, essentially.
Awesome. Yeah, definitely. If you're listening to this and you're in the market for a commercial building for your business, or you're going to buy one, you're going to build one, or even maybe take over, buy from your landlord the building you're currently in, definitely check out Paul Neal and his team there to learn more about that. We'll put links in the show notes to your book and also the your business website and all that stuff, so people can come and find you. I always like to ask everybody on the show. Obviously, your book is one, but other than your book, what is
Mhm.
a book that you're currently reading or one that you recommend?
So one that I currently read, but I read the Bible all the time. Actually, it's a lot of
Great book.
wisdom there.
Sure.
Lot of wisdom. We try to run our life on that. But
Mine right here.
from okay, there you go. So from a secular standpoint, U Squared. is one of my favorite. There's a compendium to that. The quantum, what's it called? Anyway, Price Pritchett wrote U Squared, and it actually is kind of I think he's a faithful guy, but it's kind of a secular perspective on a lot of the principles of the Bible in terms of how you can have a quantum leap in your life and your business. You don't have to move in a sort of a linear fashion. And there's a lot more going on out there than just what we see, right? And so, and I'm a firm believer in that. And so that book, Quantum Leap and U Squared by Price Pritchett, are they're really thin, Brad. I mean, you can read them literally, cover to cover in about 30 minutes. But each page is like one chapter, and each page is like something you're going to chew. It's like rope. You're going to chew on it. You're like, wow, this is pretty interesting. Like his concept of, work. Maybe it's not working harder. Maybe it's working less.
Mm-hmm.
And he talks about that. And just real quick background about him. He studied psychology and of success in college. Got a PhD, but he really cut his teeth on. When he came out of school, he worked in like Fortune 500, like Bain and Company, was big consulting companies, and his job was to interview or be on the team that interviewed like corporate CEOs and C-level corporate people for jobs. And he started to realize pretty quickly that they all had pretty much the same resume. So how do you choose one over the other if they their resume is pretty much the same? I mean, how do I know? And he started looking for sort of commonalities on why some were more successful than others outside of sort of, their education and training and that sort of thing. And he encapsulated it and so he started training companies. He's been doing it for 30 years. I mean, it's pretty phenomenal stuff, but that's a great book.
I'll definitely check it out. Is it YOU or like the letter U?
Yeah. YOU Squared.
Okay.
And also Quantum, I think it's Quantum Leap. They're almost the same. They're a little modification of one or the other. I've got them both. So,
okay.
Yeah.
I'll definitely
Price Pritchett.
Price Pritchett. I got it.
Yeah.
Wrote it down here. That's where I get a lot of my book ideas, or from guests. So I haven't heard of those. I'll definitely check them out. So I appreciate it.
Oh, I think I think you'll love it. Yeah, I think so.
Absolutely. Well, Paul, thanks so much for being on the show. I really appreciate all your insight and the service that you provide to people out there, because it is trying to navigate commercial is a whole different animal than residential. So I appreciate you being on the show.
Yeah, Brad, it's been a blast, man. I appreciate you having me on today. I really enjoyed it.
Absolutely, guys. And you know where to find me on social media. You can just search for Hammer and Grind Podcast on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and what else? TikTok. There you go. Just search for the Hammer and Grind Podcast. You'll find me everywhere. And remember, guys, until next time, profit is not a dirty word.